warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group 2. We will present the second material, Equivalence above word level. Equivalence above word level. In this chapter, we will go one step further to consider what happens when words start combining with other words to form stretches of language. Words are not strung together at random in any language. There are always restrictions on the way they can be combined to convey meaning. Some restrictions are more likely to admit exceptions and apply to individual words rather than classes of words. This cannot be expressed in terms of rules, but they can nevertheless be identified as recurrent patterns in the language. Lexical patterning will be dealt with under two main headings: collocation and idioms and fixed expressions. The first is collocation. At one level, the tendency of certain words to co-occur has to do with their proportional meanings. For example, cheque is more likely to occur with bank, pay, money, and right. Meaning cannot always account for collocational patterning. We bend rules in English, but are unlikely to describe rules as unplaintable. It will seem then that the patterns of collocational are largely arbitrary or independent of meaning.
3.1.1 Collocational range and collocational markedness. Every word in language can be said to have a range of items with which it's compatible to a greater or lesser degree. Range here refers to the set of collocations, that is, other words which are typically associated with their words in question. Some words have a much broader collocational range than others. The English verb shrug, for instance, has a rather limited collocational range. It typically occurs with shoulders and does not have a particularly strong link with any other word in languages. The first is its level of specificity. The more general a word is, the broader its collocational range. The more specific it is, the more restricted its collocational range. The second factor which determines the collocational range of an item is the number sense of it has. Most words have several senses. For example, in its sense of manage, the verb run collocates with words like company, institution, or business. Unlike grammatical statements, statements in the collocation are made in terms of what is typical or untypical rather than what is admissible or inadmissible. This means that there is no such thing as an impossible collocation. Words attract new collocations all the time. They do so naturally to processes of analogy or because speakers create unusual collocation on purpose. Patterns of collocation which have a history of recurrence in the language become part of our standard linguistic repertoire, and stop to think about them when we encounter them in text. A marked collocation being an unusual combination of words, one that challenges our expectation as hearer or readers. Marked collocations are often used in fiction, poetry, humor, and advertisement precisely for these reasons, because they can create unusual image, procedure laughter, and catch the reader's attention. War normally breaks out, but peace prevails. For example, the deliberate mixing of a collocational range in just now mentioned example conveys the unexpected image of peace being abnormal, temporary, and possibly even an undesirable situation. To sum up, new collocation created all the time, either by extending an existing range or deliberately putting together words from different or opposing ranges. New collocation often catch on, are reinforced by usage, and eventually become part of the standard repertoire of the language.
Collocational patterns are not always typical or untypical in relation to the language system as a whole. You may have noted that all the examples used so far have been all common, everyday collocation, which are more or less familiar to all of us, regardless of our occupation, specialist interest, or hobbies. Some collocation may seem untypical in everyday language but are common in specific registers. Sinclair explained that dual highlight and virtuous depression may sound odd in everyday English but are common in the field of photography and meteorology, respectively. In statistics, collocations such as bias error and tolerable error are common and acceptable. A reader who is not familiar with the register of statistics may wrongly assume that these collocations are marked. However, collocational markedness is not an absolute quality. It always depends on what the norm is in a given register. Register-specific collocations are not simply the set of terms that go with a discipline. They extend far beyond the list of terms that one normally finds in specialist dictionaries and glossaries. Is it not enough, for instance, to know that data in computer language form part of complex terms such as data processing and data bank, and to become familiar with the dictionary equivalence of such terms in the target language in order to translate computer literature. A translator must, among other things, be aware that in English computer text, data may be handled, extracted, processed, manipulated, and retrieved, but not typically shifted, treated, arranged, or tackled. A translator of computer literature must also be familiar with the way in which the equivalence of data is used in his or her corresponding target text, that is, with the set of collocations which are compatible with the equivalence of data. Being a native speaker of a language does not automatically means that the translator can assess the acceptability or typically or register specific collocation. This is a target leeway course in specialist and technical language form an important component of translation training syllabus.
In Chapter 2, meaning was discussed almost as if it was property that each word possesses. It is alright. It is, however, disputable whether a word on its own can mean nothing. We will do when we are asked to give an account. The meaning of a word in isolation is to contrast it is the most typical collocation rather than its rare or asked to explain what they mean. We are likely to think of collocations such as drink classes, dry river, and dry water, which would prompt definition free from water. As we move away from the most common collocation or dry, it becomes clear that the method depends largely on its very collocation and is not something that the word processes in isolation. 3. Perhassing the meaning of dry in each of the following combination: 3 cow, 3 breath, 3 wind, 3 sound, 3 voice, 3 counter, 3 book, 3 rhyme. Most in if all the above collections have unique meaning. This suggests that when a word meaning often depends on its association with contrast selection, with this translation of a word of such of language interages a big sort of importance in given concept. The truth may revere in the translation's inability to trace a collection pattern with a unique.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Raditya Melisari. My NPM 0910931. It is the presentation in the group the interpretation of idioms. As far as idioms are concerned, the first difficulty that a translator comes across is being able to recognize that she or he is dealing with an idiomatic expression. This isn't always so obvious. There are various types of idioms, some more easily recognizable than others. Those which are easily recognizable include expressions which violate truth conditions, such as "it is raining cats and dogs," "Collocation to the wind," "storm in a teacup jump down someone's throat," and "words for talk." They also include expressions which seem ill-formed because they don't follow the grammatical rules of the language. For example, treat the like sentences below: someone to kingdom come, but by to the powers that be, by and large, and the world and his friends. Expressions which start with like, smile, like structures, also tend to suggest that they should not seldom be interpreted in literally. This includes idioms such as like about of out hell and like water of a dark speck. Next, idioms and visit expression. The wind. Storm in a teacup down someone's throat, and words for talk. They also include expressions which seem ill format because they don't follow the grammatical rules of the language. For example, treat the like sentences below someone to kingdom come, but by to the powers that be, by and large and the world and his friends. Expressions which start with like, smile, like structures also tend to suggest that they should not seldom be interpreted in literally. This includes idioms such as like about of out hell and like water of a dark speck. Next, idioms and visit expressions which contain culture-specific items are necessarily understandable. It is not the specific items and expression contains, but rather the meaning it conveys, and it is association with culture specific context which can make it untranslatable or difficult to translate. Next, the translation of idioms difficult. Once an idiom or a fixed expression has been recognized and interpreted correctly, the next steps to decide how to translate it into the target language. The difficulties involved in translating an idiom are totally different from those involved in interpreting it. Here, the question isn't whether a given idiom is transparent, opaque, or misleading. An opaque expression may be easier to translate than an.
Next, idiom and fixed expressions. Generally speaking, collocations are fairly flexible patterns of language which allow several variations in form. For example, deliver a letter, delivery of a letter, a letter has been delivered, and having delivered a letter are all acceptable collocations. In addition, although the meaning of a word often depends on what other word in it occurs, we can still say that the word in question has an individual meaning in a given collocation. They are phrasal patterns of language which allow little or no variations in form, in the case of idioms, often carry meanings which cannot be deduced from their individual components. An idiom such as bury the hatchet, to become friendly again after a disagreement or a quarrel, or the long and the short of it, the basic fact of the situations, allow no variation in form under normal circumstances, a play on word. A speaker or writer cannot normally do any of the following with an item. 1. Change the order of the words in it, the short and the long of it. 2. Delete of a word it. Spill beans. 3. Add a word to it, or the very long and short of it. Fetch the classical music. 4. Replace a word with another, the tall and the short of it. Bury a hatchet. 5. Change its grammatical structure. The music was faced. And next, idioms, fixed expressions, and the direction of translations. Although most idioms resist variation in form, some are more flexible than others. For example, a BBC radio reporter once quoted a conference speaker as saying there was too much backpacking. Baker and McCarthy, 1988. The common form of the idiom is pass the buck, refuse to accept responsibility for something. A person's competence in actively using the idioms and fixed expression of a foreign language hardly ever matches that of a native speaker. The majority of translator working into a foreign language cannot help to achieve the some sensitivity that native speakers seem to have for judging when and how an idiom can be manipulated. Assuming that a professional translator would, under normal circumstances, work only into his or her language of habitual use, the difficulties associated with being able to use idioms and fixed expressions correctly in a foreign language need not be addressed here. The main problems that idiomatic and fixed expressions pose in translation relate to two main areas: the ability to recognize and interpret an idiom correctly, and the difficulties involved in rendering the various aspects of meaning that an idiom or a fixed expressions conveys into the target language. These difficulties are much more pronounced in the case of idiom than they are in the case of fixed expressions.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Helminaroza and I will continue the presentation. The translation of idioms. Strategies: the way in which an idiom for a fixed expression can be translated into another language depend on many factors. It is not only a question of whether an idiom with a similar meaning is available in the target language. Other factors include, for example, the significance of the specific lexical items which constitute the idiom, whether they are manipulated elsewhere in the source text, as well as the appropriateness or inappropriateness of using idiomatic language in a given register in the target language. The acceptability or non-acceptability of using any of the strategies described below will therefore depends on the context in which a given idiom is translated. The first strategy described that of finding an idiom of similar meaning and similar form in the target language may seem to offer the ideal solution, but that is not necessarily always the case. Using an idiom of similar meaning and form, this strategy involves using an idiom in the target language which conveys roughly the same meaning as that of the source language idiom and, in addition, consists of equivalent lexical items. This kind of match can only occasionally be achieved. Example: a short text, a hero from Zero, page 21. The Sultan's magnificent income was distributed impulsively at his command. The rain fell on the just and on the unjust. Using an idiom of similar meaning but dissimilar form, it is often possible to find an idiom or fixed expression in the target language which has a meaning similar to that of the source idiom or expression, but which consists of different lexical items. For example, the English expression. Example: a source text, China's panda reserves, see Appendix 3, number 54. The Zero, a type of wild mountain goat, is very much at home among the rocky outcrops of Sichuan. The presentation from our group is over. If there is a wrong word, we apologize. And thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.